right here in front of you, who's going to do the rest of the presentation and the talking with you for the rest of the afternoon. So let's look forward to a wonderful evening. Welcome.
Thank you. If it's all right, I'll stand down here for a bit and then I'll move around. Can you all hear me all right? Good. Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be here, and my thanks to the Prabha Khaitan Foundation, to the Taj Bengal, and to the Telegraph for hosting this event. It's wonderful. When I was asked to come to Kolkata, I didn't hesitate at all. It's a real pleasure to be here. This afternoon, what I'll be doing is talking a little bit about one of my books, sharing with you some of my experiences as a writer, how this book came about, where it took me. And I'll also be showing you some photographs that I've taken during the course of writing this book. The book itself does not have any photographs in it, but these are photographs that I took along the way, and I think they'll help illustrate the journeys that I took on this way. Write novels. I began my career as a novelist primarily. I write nonfiction. I write travel memoirs, such as the one I'm going to be talking about today. I write for children. I write screenplays. But as I've become older, and I don't know whether I'm more focused, but certainly as I reflect on the writing, if I was to say, if somebody asks you what kind of writer are you, I would say that I'm a nature writer, because nature figures very prominently in most of the work that I do, certainly over the last 15 or 20 years. But the book I'm going to talk to you about today was published about 1.5 years ago. It's a relatively new book in my list, and it's called Becoming a Mountain: Himalayan Journeys in Search of the Sacred and the Sublime. Now, for me, as a writer, I have perhaps a more elastic or inclusive definition of the sacred than for most people, because I'm an atheist. As an atheist, I accept things that are sacred that others perhaps might not. At the same time, I have perhaps a narrower definition, because there are things that many people would take for granted as being sacred that I reject in one way or the other. But I don't see being an atheist and searching for the sacred as being a contradiction. In fact, I've often said that for me the motivation is doubt rather than faith. And doubt can be as strong or perhaps even stronger a motivation than faith when we try to find spirituality or the sacred in the world around us. This is the shrine to Nanda Devi at Bedini Bugyal in Garhwal. It's an extremely simple but an extremely beautiful little shrine. The thing I like about this shrine particularly is that you can't enter it. You can only approach it from the outside. It's been built in recognition, in devotion to the goddess. It has much of the religious paraphernalia that other temples have, and yet it is constructed entirely of the rocks on that Bugyal itself. It is a part of nature, or as much a part of nature as a human structure can be. And for me, I find greater sanctity in a structure like this than I do in some of the more well-known temples, churches, mosques, or other religious architecture. My journeys follow pilgrimage routes. And for me, those routes, those journeys along those pilgrimage routes are spiritual journeys. Even though I myself am a non-believer, I travel those routes in search of the mythology, in search of the metaphors that exist in those particular places. I often say that I write with my feet. And many of my books describe journeys on foot, and they begin, the first draft is written with my feet as I travel along these paths. And then only when I come home do I then revise that draft and put it into words there. You see, human gestures reflect that as well. This is a yak skull on top of a pile of money stones. And again, you are struck by both the beauty of that place as well as the sense of death that is all around you. There's probably no place that exhibits the sublime quite as beautifully and with quite as terrifying a sense of vertigo as Naksang, the tiger's nest in Bhutan. As I said earlier, am not a fan of religious buildings, but this building in particular is one of the most remarkable structures that you will find, and partly because of the architecture itself, but also that location. This photograph is taken at a point where many people turn back because it is too precipitous. But the idea of constructing this building on that cliff gives you a sense of that tug of war between beauty and fear, and expresses it so profoundly. To approach Nanda Devi, you must travel up the watershed of the Ganga. And so many of the journeys that I took approaching Nanda Devi took me along the tributaries of the Ganga through Garhwal and parts of Kumaon. This is one of the most beautiful confluences in Uttarakhand. It's at Rawalpindi, at Rudraprayag. Rudraprayag is where the Mandakini River and the Alaknanda come together. Some of you may well have seen this. Just as a side note, you can see the bridge in the background, which is where Jim Corbett used to sit up for the man-eating leopard of Rudraprayag and wait for it to cross the bridge. It never crossed while he was sitting there, but the bridge is there. Just an added note, I approached Nanda Devi from different sides, from the Joshimath side, and then I trekked up to Rupkund, which is it's the so-called mystery lake in Garhwal. This lake is frozen for about 10 months of the year. It only thaws out at this time when I was there in August. And it's a mystery lake because it is full of human bones. And nobody really has come up with a satisfactory answer for how those bones got there. They've been dated back 400 years. We know they're not recent, an accumulation there. And for me also, as I was looking for the sacred and the sublime, this definitely was a darker journey. I went to Mount Kailash in Tibet. I'm sure all of you are familiar with this image. It's a picture that appears on calendars everywhere, in religious iconography everywhere. It's an instantly recognizable mountain. And I felt that I had to travel there. It was a wonderful experience. I was able to drive there from Kathmandu and then do the Kora on foot, the parikrama on foot there. It's a mountain like Nanda Devi that is surrounded by mythology, surrounded by lore, both Hindu and Buddhist lore as well. Kailash is also a fascinating mountain because as you travel around the mountain, you recognize it at each angle, from each facet, because of these striations, these rocks, the way in which the stripes are there and the snow is in front of it. And for me, one of the most interesting and powerful parts of the experience was that I was traveling with a group of about 40 pilgrims from Maharashtra and Gujarat. The only way I could get a permit to enter Tibet was to attach myself to this group of pilgrims. And it was fascinating for me to be a part of their pilgrimage. And this is, again, told to me by my friend. I'm not making this up. He fills Ravan's bladder to overflowing, so that Ravan has this irresistible urge to urinate. And of course, he then puts Kailash back down, relieves himself, and Rakshastal, which is on one side, you have Mansarovar and Rakshasthal, the two lakes below Mount Kailash, is where his urine flowed. And it is brackish, salty, and undrinkable, as against Mansarovar, which is pure and clean. Now, the whole point of that story was to tell you how these stripes got there, but we went around in a circle on that. And what these stripes are is where the ropes dug in to the mountain. And so I can never look at this mountain after that without remembering the story as it was told to me. This also, by the way, is the hood of the Sheshnag, the cobra that shields Lord Shiv in his meditation. The Kora around Mount Kailash is a difficult journey. It's very harsh. You climb up to about 18,000 feet. And when you cross the Dolmala Pass, the spectacular thing is that you can hardly see the rocks for the prayer flags. And again, this to me is one of those human gestures of veneration, those human gestures at trying to reflect nature in its many different colors. This is a Himalayan poppy, one of the rarest and most beautiful flowers in the Himalayas. And I like to think that those prayer flags take the colors from nature. The blue of that intense blue of the poppy, the yellow of the buttercups, the red of the lousewort that is there. And those flags, in a sense, are a human gesture of veneration. They carry prayers to deities, but they also carry a sense of devotion to nature itself. There are many mysteries in nature. There are many mysteries on these pilgrimages, and this was certainly one of them. I have no idea why somebody dragged a billiards table up to the north side of Mount Kailash, but there it is. There it is. It's more a rubbish tip now than a billiards table, but this is standing up there halfway around the Kora, and if you ask me to explain it, I cannot. There are some things which are unexplainable. The third mountain, I approached Nanda Devi from different angles. I circumambulated Mount Kailash, and then I decided that I would try to climb Bandar Poonch. Bandar Poonch is a prominent peak directly behind Mussoorie. It's about a little over 6,000 meters in altitude, about 21,000 feet. I've looked out on it since childhood, and I thought to myself, if I'm going to climb any mountain, this is the one I'm going to attempt. But again, the cairn, that structure that the Sherpas constructed, which in a sense replicates the mountain that we are approaching. And in the foreground, an altar on which the juniper twigs are burned. As with all of my journeys, probably the most powerful and memorable aspects of those journeys is the natural environment that I traveled through and the different species that I encountered. These are blue sheep, Bharal sheep, that were living in the Songar Valley where we had our base camp. And over the 10 days that we were camped there, they became more and more used to our presence until they finally actually came into our tents. Not when we were in the tents, but they would come into the tents. And it was wonderful to see these animals close up and to see how beautifully built they are for the mountains. They are animals that are adapted entirely to the mountains, unlike human beings. This is another animal that I love in the Himalayas. It's a mouse hare, or a pika, and it's about that big, and very, very shy. And it took me about an hour to get this photograph. I just sat there, and his curiosity finally got the better of him, and he came out. And it was like an act of meditation for me, sitting there waiting until that moment of transcendence when we both came together and our eyes met in that particular moment. A few seconds after I took this photograph, a shadow came over us, and there was an eagle, a black eagle, came swooping down and over us, and immediately the pika went straight back into the hole. One of the things that as you climb in the mountains, you think to yourself, the higher you get, the more exhilarating it will be. But the higher you get, the smaller you feel in the face of those mountains. You begin to shrink as you get up there, and those mountains get larger and larger. What you saw from a distance that inspired you, suddenly in front of you is this tremendous pile of rock that is almost unsurmountable. My second attempt on Bandapun failed as well, because when we got onto the glacier, which 3 years earlier had been relatively level and flat, it had broken up. This isn't exactly the place itself, but it gives you an idea of the ice cliffs that were there. And the terrain was so difficult and so dangerous that I certainly didn't have the courage or the skills to continue, and we had to turn back. It also had to do with the weather. 2013, if you remember, is when we had the extreme storms and the disaster in Kedarnath and in Gangotri. This set of clouds here is that storm gathering, and we were up there. If you want an experience of the sublime, camp at about 15,000 feet and have a storm below you and above you. There was lightning and thunder above and below us, and you felt so entirely exposed and vulnerable in that situation. When I set out to write this book, this is Bandapun seen from our home in Mussoorie. When I set out to write this book, I was having a cup of coffee with a friend and fellow writer Ramchandra Guha, who I've known over the years, and I told him I'm going to write a book about climbing a mountain. And writers always encourage each other, and so Ram looked at me and he said, well, it'll be a much better book if you don't make it to the top. So I hope Ram was right in this, and I leave that for you to judge. I've taken more time than I should have, but thank you all for being such an attentive audience, and I'll be happy to take some questions if there's time.
Really nice. I think we really enjoyed the session, especially the visuals and all that you said. Brilliant. I must also thank Mr. Bangur. You're a rare visitor, but looks like you were looking forward to this as a special one. So would like to please come up and.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I only wanted to ask, any of the photo have, these pictures have been photoshopped?
No.
They are the real case.
Thank you. Thank you. You're very kind. You're very kind.